Good. We're starting. Okay, welcome to Hopeifiers. I am the acapellist, and with me is Brother Scott Sweetman. Hello, Brother Scott. How you doing tonight?
I'm very good, Alan. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. I had a little wardrobe malfunction I will just fix. But other than that, I'm looking forward to our chat tonight. I don't know
That's
how
great.
you're going to make this work. Fear turning into hope, but I want to hear it, brother.
Oh, it's not me. It's some great people like Descartes and Kierkegaard and all kinds of great people today. I'm just fighting for a minute here, trying to get up my picture view. I can't see you at the moment. There we are. Okay. Because I like to talk to you and to our guests when I'm talking, not a blank screen, obviously.
Right.
Okay. So we'll pull this out here. Okay, great. Yeah, so tonight is a really interesting show. And as you said, it's going to be about the relationship between fear and hope. And it's exciting. So buckle up, buddy. Get your seatbelts on. We're ready to go.
Excellent. Well, let's kick her off.
Okay.
We were going to do this show, what, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, right? And then it got deferred because of,
Yeah,
yeah.
we had some scheduling malfunctions, and yeah, well, it was because of fear, right? I was a little worried that a friend of ours was had gone missing, but they were just delayed out putting meat on the table and fulfilling their role hunting with their children, and got tied up, so it took longer than they thought.
Hey, Scott, can I just interrupt for a minute? What do you think of this
Yeah,
shirt, brother?
I love it. It's very Japanese.
Jose's Imports. I was in there today and Jose said, I got a shirt right there for you, brother. You need that. And I looked at it and said, I do need that.
Oh.
So I put it right on in the store and wear it home. So
That's fantastic, man.
uh,
They have a lot of good stuff, eh? There's a plug
yeah,
for them.
yeah.
Where are they located?
They are right by Elrich Tire. So right on the corner, right across from the mall or the corner
Mhm.
of what is that, 4th Street and 2nd Avenue?
It's been there for a while now.
Oh, forever. Yeah, forever. They
Yeah.
got all
Yeah.
kinds of cool stuff in there.
Is Klinger's Wholesale still there, or are
No,
they closed up?
I
No,
don't think
that's
so.
unfortunate. As long
Yeah.
because they were there when I went to Japan, and they were there
Yes.
when I came back. Right? They
Oh,
were there for, yeah, a long time.
uh,
So that's pretty interesting stuff. Okay. Question: Do I look?
lost you. You said question, do I? And I didn't hear the rest. No audio. Hey, Scott. Can't hear you. All right. I think you're going to have to do this in an interpretive dance that I'll try and figure out what you're doing. No audio,
How about
brother.
you hear me?
Oh, there you were. There you are.
Okay, we'll go old school.
Okay, there we go. I can hear you.
Yeah.
Good.
No,
Excellent.
I was just
Okay.
asking if I'm really red. I'm trying. I'm just. I seem on
No,
my end. I look really, really red.
no, you don't.
Okay.
Not to me, you
Okay.
don't.
Oh, that's good. But your background looks really red to me.
Yes, the background is very red. Yes.
Sorry about that. Bad dad joke. Okay, so what we want to talk about is fear, and you asked a really good question. How does fear turn into hope? And there's been some really great studies about this, and I find I'm saying that a lot. But I'm pulling some stuff out of Psychology Today. I'm pulling some stuff out of the Psychological Online Network and some published papers about the relationship of fear and hope, and also some classical sources, as I mentioned, in the form of Descartes and Kierkegaard. So that's interesting stuff for us guys to talk about today. Okay. So one way to think about this is fear is the prompt and hope is the way. Are you with me,
Fear's
brother?
what? Say again.
Fear is the prompt.
Prompt. Fear's the prompt. Okay.
Right? Hope is the way.
Hope is the way.
Yeah. Fear is about trying to survive something, but hope is about knowing what you want that leads you to the how of not only surviving, but benefiting from the situation.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, that's a little heavy, eh?
Yeah, a little bit, but I think I'm following along there. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay. So one of the things that we can all agree with, what happens when you get scared, Al? When you feel fear, what happens to most people?
I get angry often. Like, if you're, I would often react in anger if I was
Right.
fearful state. Yeah.
Physiologically, we have a physiological reaction, right?
Yeah.
Often we get dry in the mouth. I know that when I was, worked in physical security when I was younger, that I could taste the testosterone and the adrenaline and all of the chemicals your brain floods with. I could taste it.
A bouncer is a physical. What did you call it? Physical what?
Physical security.
Physical security. Okay. Bouncer is kind of the term that most people get.
Well, I don't know if that's used anymore. It's sort of the flight attendant, stewardess.
Okay.
That goes around and around all the time too, right? So
right.
Yeah. Anyway, when I used to beat people up for a living when they got too drunk to drink anymore, that was many years ago. But there is a physiological response to fear, right?
Okay.
And we've talked about it before. There's flight, fight, or
freeze. Yeah.
Freeze, right?
Yeah, sure.
And that's a really important one because sometimes freeze is really beneficial.
Sure.
Like there's predators that you can't outrun. If we go back to evolution, there's predators that we can't outrun. There's predators that we can't outfight. And our best defense is to freeze, to do nothing, to try and blend in with the air around us, if that was possible. And so fear has a benefit in evolution, right? It often protects us from harm by causing us to flee, to fight, or to freeze. The problem with that is that we no longer live in a world that's strictly dominated by physical fear, right?
You bet.
We now have psychological fear, emotional fear, fear caused by trauma, fear caused by loss, so many different types of fear that lots of studies say that as a society, especially in modern developed nations, we have a sickness based on fear, that there are so many things that we're psychologically afraid of or traumatized by that we find ourselves in flight, fight, freeze mode a significant amount of the time. Would you agree with that? When you did your course on mental first aid, did they talk about those things, the stressors?
They did on the the mental health first aid course. It was really good, and that's one of the basically if you are in an alert and cautionary state because you always think something's going to hurt you, that's not a very healing type of a thing, right? So that's safety and the feeling of safety is very important to good health, right? That your body can restore and recover and relax.
Right. So I think we can all agree that fear is something that we want to avoid whenever we can, but it can be useful to us.
Sure.
Now, there's a lot of different viewpoints on this. Erich Fromm, humanistic philosopher, he talked about how active hope empowers us to think the unthinkable, yet to act within the limits of realistically possible. And so if we think about hope as a reaction, and that's where we get into the research that I was talking about, is there a lot of people are really starting to realize that hope is instinctual, that it's not an intellectual exercise. When I first read that, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I've always thought that hope was something that we chose, right? And that there was people more naturally predisposed to hope. optimists and people that were more predisposed to pessimism or the lack of hope. When you think about it, would you agree with the idea that hope could be instinctual, like fear?
I don't know. Like it doesn't. I don't know. That's I hadn't thought about that before. So hope being instinctual.
So I'll give you another example.
Sure.
Rebecca Solnit, a psychologist, actually, in her paper on the subject, about 2 generations after Fromm, said that hope is a gift that you don't have to surrender. And in that idea, it's a power that helps you deal with that flight, fight, freeze. And so hope, instinctual hope, is the complementary opposite to fear.
Okay.
Okay. So when we have those feelings of fear, in some ways we can turn into a deer in the headlights, right? We freeze. How do we unfreeze? Well, we either get run over, right? Or the fear passes, or we remain frozen. That's a lot of issues with trauma and mental health, is how do we unfreeze once we're frozen? And I know that you and I have talked about it before. A lot of people in today's society don't even realize that a lot of their emotions are stuck in that, because of fear, because of trauma. What's the word for it, Al? We've talked about it before. Displacement. I shouldn't have said it now.
It'll come to me. But yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
But come back to the whole thing about that being hope being an instinct. Like an instinct is something you can kind of more attribute to like our animal behaviors, right? Not our reason type behavior, right? And so I don't know if I can follow that makes sense, that it's an instinct. Fear is an instinct that protects us, right? We got the amygdala, then that's its job, is to say, look out, and it functions at what, like 750 milliseconds a really, really fast rate. And like our neocortex is like, 100 or whatever. It's going to, the amygdala has decided, boom, we're halfway to activity by the time you can get your brain to kick in and say, wait a minute. It was a stick, not a snake, right? That kind of a thing. So,
and that's a great example. And that's what traditionally we think of when we think of fear, is and of hope. But what people are looking at now is that when you really consider them, both fear and hope have a lot of evidential data that they're both instinctive and they have cognitive components to them. So that we have primal fear, but we also have primal hope at the opposite axis of that. And a lot of psychologists and a lot of researchers feel that they're always felt together. They're in what's called an axial, AXIAL, relationship. So we slide along this axis of fear and hope as mitigating and balancing. And that becomes really important when we start to think about it in terms of what it can do for us and how it works in our favor, and both as an instinct and a solution. So both have transformative powers. They can change us, but we can also change them, right? Our perspective on something, like you said, when we first see something in the grass, it's a snake. I have a wonderful video of Katrina when she was about 4 years old. She was running through the lawn and the grass was a little high. And all of a sudden I was just videoing her running, and she jumps up in the air and she takes off at about 100 miles an hour. And there's something slithering in the grass behind her. And she's like looking over her shoulder and going as fast as her little legs can go. And then all of a sudden she collapses and is laughing her head off. And I go rushing over, and she's got a garden hose wrapped around her foot. But when she first caught it on her foot, she thought it was a snake or some monster in the grass. And of course that caused her to bolt, which caused this big long snake to follow her and chase
her around. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
But as soon as she saw it was a hose, she started
Yeah.
to laugh. Right.
Yeah.
So our
Yeah.
perspective can change from fear to hope, to a positive experience. Right.
Mhm.
So,
Definitely.
and a better way to define that is that, for example, let me give an example that I've had people in my family die of cancer, and this could be triggering for other people. And as we always say in this show, 211 Canada 211 can help you out. Al's a mental aid first aider and can help you out if you want to email him. But if somebody has cancer or somebody's feeling sick, right? So, I know when my grandmother, before she was diagnosed with cancer, she had a lot of problems with her stomach for a month or two. And she was worried that it was cancer. And the fear of it being cancer caused the response of freezing her into inaction. She didn't want to go to the doctor. She
Mm.
didn't want to go for the test. She didn't want to be told.
Right.
And that's something that a lot of us feel in that situation, right? Fear. We don't want to go for the test. We don't want to go, we don't want to take our car in because the mechanic may tell us that we need a new one. That type of reaction is pretty normal.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. Makes sense.
But
right.
with a small perspectives change, and this is when it gets really interesting. We're going to keep coming back to this. And this is where fear can change to hope. With a small perspectives change, just like Katrina with the snake in the grass that was really a garden hose. If we look at it differently and we say, I hope it's not cancer, we unfreeze. And then we want to find out that it's not cancer. And taking action becomes much easier for us.
Okay.
Are you with me there?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the only part that kind of rings like the hope it's not something you don't want, I don't know if is a good way to talk to ourselves, right? Like, I hope it is not X, I'm not cancer. Wouldn't it be better to,
Sure.
I frame it
Yeah.
more in,
When you're scared, let's say you're actually scared of something, though. We're
right,
talking about, I think that I've got cancer. I'm
right,
scared crapless that I've got
right,
cancer.
right.
I hope I don't have cancer enables action.
Okay.
I start to think about, okay, wouldn't it be better to know?
Right, right. Yes.
But if I
Yeah.
say, oh my God, I'm scared I have cancer, my reaction is fight, flight, or freeze. We
I see what
know
you're saying.
that's the brain's
Yep.
reaction,
Yep.
right?
Okay. I see
So
what
by
you're saying.
that, and I'm not saying that and it's not my idea. This is, I wish it was. I'd have a PhD and be lecturing for a living. But this is what philosophers and psychologists are working on right now. And there's some great papers that I'll quote and I can put up later. But that by changing that perspective, and this is where they say it's instinctual, because there's an almost instinctual mechanism in people to change I'm scared of something to I hope it's not. And there's lots of people that say that's unrealistic, or it's like you said, it's better. That's still a rather negative way to walk around behaving, is, oh,
Yeah.
I hope it's not something terrible. But it is a
But
mechanism.
if coming to that conclusion then allows you to move forward to check it out, which then allows you to confirm whether you have it or not, and also confirm what might be the best course of action, what kind of treatments, what, that kind of thing, right? That would be, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
And
makes
that
sense.
goes back to fear is the prompt, hope is the way, right?
Mhm.
By changing the equation to I'm scared I have cancer to I hope I don't have cancer, that shows me a way. Because when I say I'm scared I have cancer, I'm basically stuck, right? From an intellectual perspective and from an instinctual perspective, my choices are rather limited as long as I'm caught in the grip of fear.
Right.
Now, if my intellect can overcome the fear and say, well, that's silly to be scared of it unless I know, that's a way out. But when we're really scared by something, go ahead. Sorry, Al.
I was just gonna say, what if it was kind of more my internal talk was, I hope hope to return to good health. It's more of a,
Yeah.
more framed in what I want is good health. That's not where I am now, but I'm hoping to, I
But
wish
you don't
to.
have that option. That's what psychologists are saying. You don't have that option when you're caught in the flight, fight, freeze
Okay.
response. That's not an option,
Okay.
right?
Fair enough.
To make the choice you're talking about, you've already moved out of the fight, flight, freeze response.
I
right?
see. Okay. Makes sense. Okay.
Right. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying that I'm not, but these scientists are not saying this is how we should think, but they're saying that this is a natural, instinctual reaction to
Right.
get us out of that flight, fight, fear
Right.
lockdown
Yes.
into a more positive way. Because once we start thinking about it as a hope I don't have, then we can start considering a pathway to find out whether we do or we don't. As long as we're locked into genuine fear, we're immobilized, paralyzed.
Cool.
Everyone
All
says
right.
I was paralyzed by fear. So we're on the same track. We're just talking about different points on that spectrum, right?
Yep.
Okay. So the link is explained in what I talked about in a polar model of hope and fear. And there's diagrams of this, and what it looks like is an X. Okay. And so on the polar opposites, and this is an emerging theory of hope and fear, that they're aspects of the same emotion, only separated by perspective at a primal level. And like you say, once we can think about it, if we're not caught in the flight, fight, fear response, there's a lot better ways to deal with a situation than I hope I don't have cancer, obviously. But it is at the primal level a way evolution has gotten us out of that lockdown, is what people are starting to believe now. Okay. And that's hope and fear both have a purpose where fear is concerned, and people believe it's evolutionary. And they're exploring this evolutionary link as a moderator to fear. So it's an evolutionary moderation to the flight, fight, fear response, which I think is really interesting. Right? Because the fear is designed to move us away from danger. But when the pressure, when the pain, when the anxiety of that fear becomes too much and we freeze, we're basically done for. We're in a state of mental catastrophe, right? And we have to find a way out of that, whether it's getting help, whether there's no instinctual way to get out of that except possibly through the concept or the feeling or the emotion of hope. Okay? And these researchers believe that hope has arisen as an instinctual lightener, balancer, mitigator of the very strong fight, flight, freeze response that all human beings have.
Interesting.
Blew me away. That I was thinking, okay, and I was like you. I was like, okay, where are we headed with this? But it becomes really interesting when we start to consider that perspective. So, as I promised, we were going to talk about Descartes, and I'm just getting it so I can quote him. So, everyone probably knows who Descartes is, or I'll put it up on the link that we can have a look to it. As we talked about, hope is a gift that we don't have to surrender, but that we have. Just a sec here, Al. I'm sorry, I've lost you again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. Yeah, no problem. Are you going to share something, Scott? Is that you want to do?
No, I'm just. There we go. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is a really bad way to, but I'm like on 4 devices here. Okay. Can you see this?
Then put some glasses on. Yes, I can. Hope. It's backwards, but it's hope. It will hope. No hope.
I'll read it to you. You can see the shape and the 2 red arrows and the 2 green arrows.
Yeah, see it. Yeah.
Okay. So the top we have hope it will, hope it won't. So hope it will is a positive feeling, right?
Right.
Hope it won't is a negative feeling. But on
Okay.
the opposite of hope it will, we have fear it won't, which is a negative feeling,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Fear it will, if we go up that tangent, is hope it won't. So this is called the polar model of hope and fear, presented by Dr.
Interesting.
Crocker in 2015.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. I like, you know what, that this is all new to me, but thank you for that research and thank you for that perspective. That's a whole different way to look at it. Right. And it's kind of like, it makes me think of our bodies when we have pain. Pain is something that says, pay attention, right? We need something here. Like there's something that isn't right here. And, you know, sort of in a similar way, fear is there's something that's causing me fear, which is causing me to pay attention to it. And if my instinctual thing is, I hope it is not the worst case scenario, then that
Mhm.
allows me to move forward and research whether it is or not. Is kind of, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
exactly right. And,
Yeah.
and so what I liked about this is it's coming out of a lot of research that has been done into some people call it the fear cycle, some people call it the polar model that I just showed you. And I'll post that under our show on the website, that model and the link to it, because there's quite a lengthy paper on it. Well, it's not too bad, but it comes out of a symposium in May of 2016 on hope, fear, fearful hope, and a polar perspective of the relationship. Okay.
Excellent.
And yeah,
Where do we
that's
post these, Scott? Where for our viewing audience? Where do we post these things?
on the acapellas.ca, and I'll post the link on both your site and my Facebook site, and I can get it up as a lower 2/3. Probably you know how to change that on the StreamYard more than I do. I think our viewers probably know that I'm not a StreamYard user except for this show, so sometimes it gets a
Did you
little
want?
bit.
I got the little our little label banner on the bottom. You want me to take it off?
No, that's okay. I was just going to put on the acapellas.ca where they can get the
Well,
link
if
to
you
this.
put that in the chat, it'll show up on the bottom. So here, let me make this banner go away.
Oh.
And then if you put in the chat acapellas.ca, and then I should be able to click on it and it'll show up on the bottom.
Okay. People are getting a StreamYard lesson and a lesson on polar psychology, polar model of fear and hope in psychological study. Okay, there we go.
Well, that was a good one, Scott. No, not in the private chat, in the normal chat. I don't think in the private chat it like shows up anymore. Oh, here, that's okay. Let me just copy it. I got it.
I didn't know we had a private and public chat. I'm sorry, buddy.
We're a big deal. We're a big deal around here, bud.
We've got both, eh? It's nice.
Yeah, we're serious. Okay, so watch this. Watch it now. Here it comes. Oh, what the hell? No.
That was a big lead up, Al.
What the? Oh, okay. Here we go. This time I'm going to get it. Oh, come on, Alan. Yes, there we go. Okay. So that's where Scott is. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please.
I was just saying that is where, for our viewing audience, where Scott is putting resources that he references in this show. So that polar opposite between fear and hope, that polar arrow thingy. So that is where you will find that resources on at the acapellas.ca. Correct, Scott Sweetman?
That's absolutely correct. Now,
all right,
let's go back to Descartes, because Descartes, as we know, was centuries ahead of the studies we're talking now in 2016. And his language is a bit different, but he's talking about that sliding scale between fear and hope. And he argues that a severe imbalance in those two is disastrous to us. That we need to have that balance and that ability to slide along that continuum from fear to hope that we need as entities. And again, his wording is a bit different, I encourage, if people are interested, to read Rene Descartes' The Passions of the Soul and other late philosophical writings. Great stuff. It's not overly complex, but it's the wording is of his time, so it's a little bit flowery, and you have to take some license with interpreting a little bit. But he talks about how an excess of fear will drive out all hope. Freeze, flight, fight. Right?
Sure.
If there is no hope, if you
Right.
can't change "I'm scared of it" to "I hope it won't," that it leaves you with nothing but paralyzation. And this was 300-400 years ago. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting that the philosophers of that day were talking about this. And also, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that an excess of optimism drives out all uncertainty, which is just as paralytic for us, humankind, as fear. And by that, and the scientists now, and there's a great article called, let me just get it here, Psychology Today. Sorry?
So go again. Like, so you're saying if you're too much optimism, too much optimism is as bad as too much fear.
Yes, Descartes saying that.
Descartes saying that.
Because
because
a little bit of fear motivates us. Fear is an important motivator. I don't go out and pick food if I'm not scared of starving to death. I don't save money if I'm not scared of being broke. A little bit of fear keeps us motivated to be active and to do things.
Okay.
Right? That's what Descartes saying. Okay. There's a great article in Psychology Today, March 29th, 2021, by Ikula Hagen, and it's 5 reasons hope can be the scariest emotion.
Ooh, let's hear it.
Yeah, right? So this is really interesting. And so it boils down to basically people who want to be prepared for the worst. And so, you know, people who say the most important thing, yeah, you can be hopeful, but always be prepared for the worst. And that translates to some really scary things, and how anxious people feel with something called defensive pessimism. And this is a psychological state that's been identified. Okay. I'd never heard of it before. Have you ever heard of that before?
Nope.
Okay. Characteristics of defensive pessimism are thinking about potential negative outcomes, seeking information about the likelihood of negative outcomes, planning for what you will do if an option you are currently pursuing does not work out. Okay. For example, you research new job opportunities in case you do not get the promotion you were shortlisted on. Now, a lot of people say this is common sense, right? But when it's taken to an extreme, it becomes this condition. So defensive pessimism is not hopelessness. It still includes an element of hope. As I said, it's the old adage, hope for the best, plan for the worst. But with this, wildly fluctuating hope puts people in that state of mental trauma or frozen, a mental state of frozen action. People fear the feeling hope will make receiving bad news even harder to cope with. So, and it may be hard to understand if you don't have this condition. It's like autism and a lot of other mental conditions. And I have a little bit of trouble mentally associating with this, but I can kind of understand it. So, for example, if you buy a lottery ticket and rationally know that your chances of winning are 1 in a million, then not winning is relatively easy to handle.
Sure.
But I've read stories about where people the people who most often buy lottery tickets and gamble are often people who need the money the most.
Yeah.
And they're hoping that if they gamble, or they're hoping if they buy a lottery ticket, they'll win enough that they can pay their rent and they can buy food for their kids, et cetera, et cetera. So we can kind of understand this. And it comes down to how crushed you feel, or the negative feelings that you actually internalize, are how high the stakes are in a situation. So rather than how much hope you felt or didn't feel is the real situation. But somebody with defensive pessimism is highly unlikely to be blindsided by a predictive negative outcome that they have not anticipated. So basically, they describe it as a state of pre-grieving. And this was the easiest explanation for me to understand, not being a psychologist. So let's say that I'm up for a job and I go to the interview, everything goes fine. But on the way home, all I can think about is, well, it's okay. If I didn't get the job, I can stay at my job I have now, right? And so we start to pre-grieve, to pre-mourn, to predict the loss. And in that situation, we are going through the emotional trauma the same as if we had lost that thing. Right? So, for example, I know that Sabrina had some problems with one of her bones when she was 2. And the end cap had continued to grow. And I forget what it's called right now. It's not an uncommon thing. And so I did a lot of research on this, and I was pretty confident what it was. And we took it to the doctor, and the specialist that we were supposed to see, this was in Japan, was tied up. And so an intern came. And so he looked at it, he hemmed and hawed, and he did some other things. And he said, I'm really, really sorry, but it's probably cancer. And had I not done an extensive amount of research before I went there, I knew the probability of it being cancer was extremely low, and that a doctor could not diagnose it as cancer simply by looking at it. I would have been crushed by that statement.
Sure. Yeah.
It would have been, my response would have been exactly the same as if she had cancer, because in that moment I believed it, right?
Yeah, sure. Makes sense.
So if I went to that meeting in a state of defensive pessimism, if I said, I don't want to be hurt so much, I'm going to prepare myself for the bad news that it's cancer. I'm going to put myself through the stress as if the outcome was already known. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
So this is why when they talk about optimism can be a problem, we also have the situation where the lack of optimism, or the inverse of that, which they call defensive pessimism, for some people, hope is the scariest emotion, not fear. Fear is more comforting because they believe they can count on it.
Right.
So you're imagining a mental state where people are saying, if I accept now that it's going to be cancer, and it turns out it's not, I can rejoice and be happy. But I'm prepared if they tell me it's cancer. Now, in Sabrina's case, of course, it wasn't cancer, and I had believed going into that it wouldn't be. I had switched my mental thinking from I fear it is to I hope it's not. And that action took me to doing research. It took me to learning about the condition. It took me to learning about the probability that it was or it wasn't. And in that way, I was ready to deal with a situation when I was incorrectly told that it might be.
Yeah.
Right?
You know what this reminds me of? I watched this video this week. I thought she was really good, and it was about how why don't people heal? Like, so if there are people who have, like, emotional things have happened to them, trauma has happened to them, so why don't they heal? And basically, if I understood what she was saying, it's really that they just can't get to that level of belief that that could happen. So believing that, thinking for this optimistic future kind of thing is kind of out of the realm of possibilities, and you can't kind of go there. You know what I mean? And so, and that jump to go to this, what there is a better future, that's hope, right? That's what, you know, but the defensive pessimism is, from what I'm understanding, is just kind of, we got to lock down what we got. Like, it just, we don't want it to be any worse, right? That's all we like, that we're protecting what we've got. It's not a growth mindset. It's not a, it's going to get better. It's a, things are bad and getting worse. Like, let's lock down what we got.
And there's in classical comedy, there's always the character that, you know, was sort of the sad sack character, right? He always anticipates things to be horrible. So when they're just, you know, slightly uncomfortable, he thinks he's got to win there, right? Because he was anticipating them to be horrible. And, you know, in that way, I can understand this condition or this situation.
Yeah, cool.
But I do think the research into this correlation between, I fear it is, to I hope it's not, I think is an instinctual way to break that lock. And I think that if people find themselves so paralyzed by a situation or by a thought that they can't get past the fear, if they can force a small perspective change, and like you were saying, it's not ideal because it's still very far away from a positive perspective. But according to this research, according to the papers I was reading, it's the first step in sliding up that scale of positivity to hope. When you can make that small switch from I fear it is to I hope it's not. Because we've talked about so many times that hope isn't a wish. Hope is something that you believe could be an outcome if you can find a way to make it happen. Right?
You know what, the image I get as you're talking there, Scott, is kind of like, you know, think about you in a, like a dark place by yourself, right? Because that would be a place where you could be overwhelmed with fear, right? And be overwhelmed that you will never ever get out, and like that's the end of things for you, right? And then there's one little crack, and then there's some light, and you could see people outside of that light, you know, that kind of a thing. Well, that would be the hope, right? That would be it would be natural for us to go to whatever glimmer that might be, you know, to be better than our current situation, right? So yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I agree with you 100%. I think that because we're dealing with science, because we're dealing with professional scientists in this, they want to take it down to an absolute, right? That there's some finite point where you're sitting on this infinite spectrum of fear response, to where you make a small adjustment in perspective and you slide onto another axis where you're moving towards hope and possibility. I think you and I like to think about it like you just said, and we've talked about it before. And the article does, and some of the research papers talk about research that's been done into people that should die, like they're stranded out in, you know, a glacier somewhere, and everything's against them, but they somehow stay, you know, sane and get themselves out of it, or survive until help gets there. And then we've all heard lots of stories where, you know, somebody is 20 feet away from help, but for whatever reason they give up and don't think they can make it, and you know, it turns out to be a deadly choice.
The fear hope line between the two, the diagonal kind of between them, did you call that an axial? Is that the word you use? AXIAL?
I want to get it right because it's an actual scientific thing. It's not just
right, and it's basically where they have a relationship, maybe not a mutually exclusive relationship, but there is a tie that they are together, right?
Right. There's another chart, and I was actually working on how to display charts in SteamYard, and so that I can show these things, because sometimes and that's how I could understand it much easier, is when I looked at these charts. But yeah, so it's called the Polar Model of Hope and Fear by Coker, 2015.
Understand what the lines that connect them between What is that called? I think you called it an axial at one point.
Yeah, it's an axis or axis.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah,
sort of an
I think so. Thank you.
yeah? So
All right.
it's a two-way perspective, and that, I guess the point of today's show is that sometimes that little perspective shift, it's like you say, you're in that dark room all alone, and you can change that. I fear I'm going to die here alone. So I hope that crack will widen just enough every day that I could see a little more and a little more till finally I can escape into the sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
That's moving up that axiom of that axis of hope.
Yep.
And that's what I found really enlightening and satisfying in this research, is that instinct, evolution, God, whatever you think brought us to where we are now, provided us with a way out of that freezing, horrible, deer in the headlight fear where we just feel there's no way out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Cool.
think that's an amazing thing, right?
That's great. That's great. I appreciate the knowledge, Scott. That was things that this was all new to me, that access, but it makes sense. I can see where you're coming with it and the research you've done. So thank you for that. And what
No
should we
problem.
tell our viewers we're going to talk about next week?
I think next week we're going to talk about, as we're headed back into the holidays again, and we talked a little bit about it last year, but this year I think we're going to talk about the hope of unfulfilled wishes and how that can be overcome. And what I've been looking at for next week's show is, with COVID and all the lockdowns, and if you haven't been following the news, but in North America, the governments have really been threatening people if they don't get their vaccinations, that we're going to go back to lockdowns for the holidays. And that's causing a lot of people to lose hope in a season that's very, very hopeful. And I've been looking into solutions and suggestions from religious leaders, philosophers, and psychologists about how we can deal with that sort of mixed feeling we have, right? Because the holidays, whatever your religious affiliation, are usually filled with hope. Even if you're an atheist, it's a time when people usually have time off, or you work and make extra money, or
you're
right?
going to spend more time with people you love. Yeah. You're still going to have an enjoyable period there, right? So
right. And so this year we're not facing the certainty of lockdowns, which we were last year, right? This time last year we knew that we weren't to go visit our families and that we were to be, distancing and all of those things. But this year there's a lot of uncertainty about it, and almost a threat that if we don't, take care of these things, and that if too many of us get sick, etc., that uncertainty is causing a lot of stress and trauma. And I was looking into how we can deal with that. So I think that it's a good time to share that as we head into the holiday season.
That's what we're chatting about next week. Take us home there, Scott. What are we saying goodbye here?
We are saying, from my friend Alan Friesen, the acapellist, and myself, Scott Sweetman, have a hopeful week, and we'll be here next Thursday, 7 p.m., Just TV, just for you, to talk about hope, the holidays, and keeping it together. Stay real, everyone. Take care.
Get 'em, Hudson.